Good afternoon, 5 to 1. Welcome back to our daily devotional series as we go through the book of Daniel right now. So yesterday's devotional looked at Daniel chapter 4, and what we were looking at in that was King Nebuchadnezzar's change of heart. God had come to him and revealed that if he continued in his arrogance, he would lose his kingdom for a period of time until he acknowledged that God was the sovereign one in control of everything, the one who sets kings over kingdoms, rules the nations, rules the entire universe. And so we see exactly that's what happened. Nebuchadnezzar, he went for a while, and then one day he gets up and he looks out at his kingdom and he goes, how great am I that I have this kingdom? And God strips away his kingdom from him. He goes in the wild, he kind of loses his sanity for a period of time. But once he acknowledges God, he comes back. Well, today's chapter, Daniel chapter 5, picks up right after that and deals with a very similar concept. See, Nebuchadnezzar has died at this point, and his successor, King Belshazzar, has taken over as the ruler of all of Babylon. Now, Belshazzar was alive during the time of Nebuchadnezzar and would have been aware of everything that had happened with Nebuchadnezzar, that he had lost his kingdom because he didn't acknowledge God and glorify God for who he was, and that once he did, he received it back. But what we see here is that Belshazzar does not learn from his predecessor's experiences. This chapter opens and Belshazzar is having a grand feast with all the nobles in the kingdom. He's just throwing a massive party. And what he does right off the bat, he does something very dangerous. He takes the objects of worship. See, when Babylon came into Jerusalem and conquered Jerusalem, they went into the temple because Jerusalem had this beautiful temple that they used to worship God. And he sacked it, or he took all the items that were valuable out of the temple. The cups, the saucers, the lampstands, anything that was beautiful, gold, silver, bronze, and he took it to his kingdom, basically just to have nice things. And so Belshazzar takes these objects. Now, we don't know what Nebuchadnezzar did with it, but Scripture doesn't say he did anything like this, but Belshazzar takes these objects and starts handing them out to the nobles at the party to drink from. And so he's taken the objects that were objects of worship to God that people had used for worship ceremonies, and he's filling it with cheap wine so people can drink out of it. And so he is desecrating these objects of worship. And so in the middle of this party, King Belshazzar looks out and it says, the fingers of a man's hand appeared in thin air and began writing on the plaster of the king's palace wall next to the lampstand. So get this, they're at the party, everybody's having a good time, and all of a sudden Belshazzar looks up and there's just a disembodied hand writing on the wall. And Scripture says that King Belshazzar became afraid. The color drained from his face. It actually says he soiled himself, he went to the bathroom, and his knees started knocking together, so he's terrified. And King Belshazzar looks out at what's happening and he calls all the wise men, the magicians, and the Chaldeans together, and he says, whoever can interpret the message written on this wall, I will give him a robe of purple, chains of gold to wear on his neck, and I'll make him the third highest person, authority-wise, in the kingdom of Babylon. And so all the wise men come, they're looking at this inscription on the wall, none of them understand it. And as Belshazzar gets more afraid, the queen comes and says, Your Majesty, remember this, your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, had an experience where he needed interpretation and reached out to a man named Daniel, or Belteshazzar was his Babylon name. And he was able to provide an explanation. And so Belshazzar finds Daniel and brings him in and says, Daniel, I've heard that you can interpret dreams and that you have wisdom and insight. Can you tell me what this means? I'll give you a robe of purple, chains of gold, make you the third highest person in the kingdom. And Daniel looks at him and says, Your Majesty, you may keep your authority, you may give the gift to somebody else, but I will interpret this for you. And so Daniel goes over to the wall and he looks at the writing on there and he says, this is the interpretation, because what was written was this, many, tekel and parson. And he says, this is what it means. Many means that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel means that you have been weighed on the balance and found deficient. And peres, which is the singular for parson, means that your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And so what we see here is that this message that had been given to King Belshazzar was a message from God. God was proclaiming that because Belshazzar had not honored God and sought God, God was now going to discipline him by giving his kingdom to another. And so what we see in last chapter, Nebuchadnezzar listened to God. Not at the beginning. He did say, this is a great kingdom, it's mine, I'm so great, and God allowed him to lose his kingdom for a period of time. But then he turned and acknowledged God and came back and God restored his kingdom. Belshazzar doesn't get the same warning because Belshazzar was there when all of this happened with Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar knew better. And yet, even knowing better, he does not seek or acknowledge God, and so God comes in and disciplines him. If you won't seek me and use this kingdom to glorify me, I will give it to someone else. And now it's important to understand the Medes and the Persians weren't some great kingdom that take over. They didn't love or acknowledge God either. But we do see God's sovereignty in this, that the king of Babylon was not the ultimate authority. And you see, in our lives, God gives us a lot of gifts and talents. Some of you guys have amazing gifts and abilities, whether that's with sports, music, academics, a million other things. And God gives us those not just to have, certainly not to show off, look how amazing I am, although in the course of time, people do look at great gifts and they say, wow, that person's incredible. But God gave us these gifts to glorify Him and to use as a platform to point people to Him. And God is perfectly within His power and perfectly sovereign that if we don't use those gifts correctly, to take them from us. Jesus has a parable in the Gospels where a man was giving out talents to his servants, to one 1, to one 3, and to one 5. The one with 5 made more, the one with 3 made more, the one with 1 hid the 1 talent, which was a piece of money, and buried it so he wouldn't lose it. When the master came back, they all had made more except for the individual who had 1. And the master was upset because even though he had little, he didn't do anything with it to get more. And what that parable was showing us, Jesus was explaining that God gives to people different abilities, different opportunities, and He expects us to use them to glorify Him. To the one who has little, if he's not used correctly, God will take that away and give it to the one who has more. Give it to the person who's faithful. So my encouragement is this: as you go through this week, look at what you're good at. Look at your talents. How can you use your gifts and your abilities to glorify God and to give other people hope around you in the midst of what's going on right now? I love you guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this passage. Feel free to comment below, message us on Instagram. Looking forward to hanging out with middle schoolers tonight and high schoolers. I will see you tomorrow night. Make smart choices, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.